Some worrisome trends, Monday Musings. As Catholics, we always have to live in reality, and that means we can't be oblivious to what's happening in the culture around us. And there are certainly, we can't be unaware that there is an extreme push to have a very secular ideology placed upon us and culture. And so we can't be oblivious to that. We have to promote our Catholic faith and what we believe as much as we can. And so I'm just going to talk about some worrisome trends that we've seen in regards to the private and also the public sector. Private companies obviously have the ability to do what they want, and obviously in America, and that certainly is something worthwhile that they should be able to do. But there is something worrisome about these big tech companies in particular because they do provide, they are a primary news outlet for so many people. And so, what they do does impact so many people because they do have such a, active presence in how we get so much information. So there is more of a concern than other private sectors with this big tech because of the reach that they do have in, areas that affect all of our lives. So recently, Amazon removed a book that was critiquing the transgender movement. It was a book by Ryan Anderson, who is the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And this was a book that came out a while ago, and it was just removed from Amazon for purchase. The book was called When Harry Became Sally, responding to the transgender movement. And Amazon removed this book because it was being critical of the transgender movement. Obviously, when it comes to this, these are always, certainly touchy issues, and those who do identify as transgender, certainly we do need to have a pastoral outreach to them. But it does become more worrisome when the culture does adopt an extreme position on some of these issues. When we, in particular, when we allow transgender to become normative in society, we certainly wouldn't, Catholics believe that crucifixes should be in our institutions. We certainly wouldn't expect culture to all of a sudden have crucifixes in every public building. So some of this does go that there is certainly more of a openness to these extreme secular ideology than there is to what we believe as a people of faith. And in his book, he was basically critiquing this transgender movement on psychological, biological, and philosophical areas. And this was kind of what made me get this video, because this became very prominent recently. And even 4 senators wrote a letter to Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, inquiring about why this book was removed. And that was Mike, I can't actually see his last name, from Indiana, Josh Hawley of Missouri, Mike Lee of Utah, and Marco Rubio of Florida. And in their letter, they said that Amazon did not provide, quote, sufficient explanation as to why Anderson supposedly violated a vague, undefined, offensive comment standard. And this book did actually make 2 of Amazon's bestsellers list. And in spite of all this, Amazon did keep another book that's available for purchase, not this, When Harry Became Sally, responding to the anti-transgender movement. Now with this, I shop on Amazon. I'm not saying we should all boycott Amazon. But we should be aware of these trends, and then we do decide how we spend our money. And anytime if we are ever going to a boycott, we can do it for 2 reasons. We can do it collectively as a group so that we might have an impact on whatever institution we might be trying to boycott. That certainly can be worthwhile at times. Or we could always just do a private boycott as a way of spiritually sacrificing. Again, with this, it doesn't seem to me we're at a point where we can't use these services anymore, any of these I'm going to mention, but we should be aware that in some ways these companies aren't supporting us as a people of faith. I bought numerous faith-based things on Amazon, so they certainly are not scrubbing all faith from them. Instagram actually went after Saintly Heart, which is a small online Catholic toy company, and they received a tag that one of their Instagram posts was removed because it was overtly sexual. And the post in particular was a wooden image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And the tag, it was actually flagged on the day that we pray for the legal protection of the unborn, and Our Lady is the patroness of the unborn. So obviously it's kind of strange, and they did submit a request, but they never heard anything about why that image was removed. The Twitter account of Catholic World Report was suspended because they described Dr. Rachel Levine, who I'll talk about later, as a biological male identifying as a transgender woman, and this violated their rule about hateful conduct. And that's where we always have to be concerned. This suspension was eventually lifted. We do always have to be concerned with that, because when what we believe as a church starts to become identified as hateful speech or hateful speech or conduct, that obviously is going to limit the way that we can preach and talk about our faith. Tan Books, they had one of their books, The Anti-Mary Exposed, pulled from their Facebook and Instagram accounts. And the Facebook ads for Tan Books, for Motherhood Redeemed, two other books, for Motherhood Redeemed and The Devil and Karl Marx, were taken down because it supposedly had sensational content policy. Then there was, so again, more trends to be worried about. There was also an ad for Just Love Prince was censored by Facebook because they had an image that said, "Rest in Him," and that was apparently sexually suggestive material that violated Facebook standards. So I'm sure, we can all imagine there's probably a lot worse things on all these platforms than what we're seeing. This gained a lot of attention some time ago. YouTube completely removed LifeSite News from its channel, and they eventually did lift that suspension, if I'm not mistaken, although if you go to YouTube, they don't have a channel there, so I'm not sure if they chose not to re-put their things back on. They were suspended because of video with Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas. He explained why, in good conscience, he would not be taking any vaccines derived from aborted cell lines that were tainted with abortion. Obviously, this isn't the official position of the church. If you want to have, if you do that of your own conscience, you're certainly allowed to, but that is not the official position of the church. Still, should that be censored on YouTube? They got a 2-week suspension because it was considered medical misinformation. LifeSite appealed, and eventually I believe they were allowed to. Google also banned LifeSite News from its AdSense advertising program, which I'm not sure what that is, and also their Discover News service, which basically that basically suggests material that you can look at beyond just a simple search because of what they alleged was dangerous or derogatory content. Again, so anytime we see our positions being treated this way, we always have to be concerned. Might have to go quick through these. The last is not the most important, but it's very important. Now we'll get to the public sector. Again, politics, we're talking about political figures, not endorsing political candidates in any way. President Joe Biden's nominee for the Secretary for Health and Human Services, who is the California Attorney General, Xavier Becerra, he actually declined to comment if he would support any theoretical type of restriction on abortion. He wouldn't comment if abortion would be okay even after a child is found to be with Down syndrome. So could you abort just because the child had Down syndrome? He wouldn't comment on that. He wouldn't commented on if there would be a ban on sex-selective abortions. Wouldn't comment on partial birth abortion ban, and obviously when he was in California, he promoted, actively supported abortion. So worrisome there. Dr. Rachel Levine is Biden's nominee for the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, and apparently, I'm not sure if I'm going to get all the political lingo on this correct. She is a biological male who identifies as a transgender female. Obviously, we do treat all people with respect and compassion, and we do try to bring the gospel to all people. We do have to be worried. And what she did was she would not say whether she could, if the government could intervene when parents refuse a child's gender transitioning. Again, that's always concerning when the government starts to take the place of the family, in particular the role that parents have. If it's an issue of food, clothing, or shelter, or they're not getting education, obviously those are different scenarios, but when they start getting more intrusive, that becomes more worrisome. The House recently passed, which will now go to the Senate, I believe, the Equality Act, which basically will discriminate against us as people of faith. The bishops have written a letter against this, and it also allows for tax-paying funder for abortion, and it does limit freedom of speech in a significant way, and it would prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in employment. And so this would be in particular concerning to us, and it's basically trying to amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it basically, what's so worrisome about this is it forbids any religious-based objections. So basically any objections that we would have as a people of faith would no longer be allowed under this Equality Act. And it basically does away with all biological distinctions. So this would allow parishes, parochial schools, hospitals, any religiously affiliated institutions to be sued without any religious objections allowed. So it would compel biological men to use women's restrooms, sports teams. When, boys could use the women's locker room. Shelters for abused women would even have to allow men. Obviously, boys and girls sports would be exposed through all this. So, and again, most worrisome about this is there is no protection for religious objections. So these are just some worrisome concerns that we should be concerned with. Our society is trying to certainly push a secular agenda, so we have to be aware of that as people of faith. See you soon, St. Catherine's.